Today, writing seems to be a lost art as more people communicate through email, social media, and texting. But a new book is reigniting the passion for personal writing, especially letters that can be cherished for years or even generations. And what better time to start than Valentine's Day? Please welcome the author of The Forever Letter, Rabbi Elana Zaiman. It's so good to have you here. Thank you. I enjoyed this. And I am kind of an inveterate letter writer, so I think I'm, an old-fashioned person, but we're seeing less and less of it, correct? Right. So were you motivated by that to write this book, or were there other things?
There were some other things. When I had this it was this amazing day, actually, when I was 14. I came home from school, and shortly thereafter, my dad came home from work, and he handed me this letter that he had written. And it was a letter to his children, and it was a letter where he put himself on the page. Fully. He put himself, his heart, his soul, what was most important to him, and he was vulnerable. And I went into the den to read this letter. I had no idea what it was. I read it, and I'm like, wow. And I just cried. And I held on to this letter for years and years, wherever I traveled, taking it with me. And it was this letter that he had written to his children to share himself, his values, that
Was there something in the writing of it that he couldn't do verbally?
I think there is something about that. There is something about sometimes that we can't state verbally what we sometimes feel. I felt his love. He would say, I love you. He would give hugs, and he would do that. But here he was, a congregational rabbi at a large synagogue, and I'd see him up on the pulpit. And now, here he was handing me this vulnerable letter about his personness. And he put himself on the page, and handing that to me that I could then hold on to was such a gift.
He created a legacy. Sometimes I think it's, when we're in conversation, I'm listening to you, but I'm seeing your reactions, that kind of thing. And so it's a two-person act. When you are writing just by yourself, sometimes you can really channel what it is that's inside of you. Let's talk about the end of your book and then the beginning of your book. So the end of your book was really interesting because one of the things you brought out were historical documents, wills and other kinds of things that have survived from centuries ago that give us such a glimpse not only into the time but into a person who would otherwise sort of be lost on your ancestry chart somewhere.
Right.
Why did you choose to include that?
Because this was really based on an ancient Jewish tradition from years and years ago, usually from the Middle Ages, medieval times, and it was about writing legacy letters essentially to one's children. And so the voices at the end in the appendix are voices that were those voices from that period in time. And some of the voices were really incredibly, a little more loving, but most of those voices were a little more commanding. And so you have a sense of the different pieces and generations that come about.
There's some odd bits of advice in there also.
There are some interesting bits of advice, ritual advice and superstitious advice.
But I just kept thinking how much we would all love to have a letter from an ancestor 700 years ago. And have some idea of who they were. So let's talk about Valentine's Day. And I swear I have mixed emotions about Valentine's Day because I don't want anybody who's not in a couple situation to feel left out of Valentine's Day, and I think we need to be mindful of everyone around us on this day. So the Valentine's Day letter could be to your mom, to your child, to your friend. This is not just between
not necessarily just between lovers, though it can be. So Valentine's Day, I think the key to writing a forever letter in general, and a forever letter is different than these ancient legacy letters, because a forever letter goes in all directions. Parents to children, children to parents, spouses to one another, anyone to anyone, children, students, teachers to one another. And the point of a Valentine's Day, let's just take Valentine's Day, and you can write to anybody. So let's do 3 tips for Valentine's Day.
All right, very good. I'm listening.
For Valentine's Day, first of all, the thing is to be present in your letter and to be vulnerable, but to be present. How do you be present? And there's been studies shown that when you look into someone's eyes, there's a really deep connection that happens and bodily things begin to change. And so I recommend that when you're starting to write a letter, you put out a picture of the person or a few pictures of the person you're writing to, and that way you can really connect with them and be more present. The next thing is to be fully loving. And at the same time is to share your love, and to write your love is to also write your challenges, because that's what it's about. It's really about the two together. And so remembering specific moments in time, things that you, challenges that you overcame together. It can be things that are really positive, and it can be things that were challenges. It's really, but the idea is playful times, memorable moments. Really, really a gift. And then the third piece is to look toward the future together. What is it that you want to create in the future together, and how do you want to go about that so that there's a consistency and a continuity?
And then the letter takes you from this moment in time forward into the future. Yeah. So Valentine's Day's letters are obviously important. You could do this at any point. Is there something, some reason, you know, if we're thinking now, well, I'll get to it. I'll get to my forever letter because it's forever, right? So I'll write it when I feel inspired. Is there a reason to get to it sooner than later?
Yes, there's always a reason, because if we keep putting it off and saying we're going to get to it, we're going to get to it, we often don't get to it because there's something that always comes in the way. The things we really most want to do, sometimes we find other things to do. It's hard to do. It's hard to sit down and be vulnerable with the paper.
Right. Can you write it over time?
You can totally write it over time. You can write it at any point you want. My recommendation is usually to write it and then to put it aside for a little while so that when you come back you can see how does the tone feel and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Is there a difference between handwriting it and typing it out on the computer?
People do different things. Some, like my handwriting is not very legible, so I'm not sure.
Want somebody to read it,
I'm not sure that I would, whatever. But you know, there is something about handwriting, and there is something that brings you closer to that person. If you do handwrite, you got to handwrite with an archival pen, because otherwise, or at least black or blue ink, because if you use pink ink or purple ink, it will fade.
It will fade away.
It will fade.
Okay.
And I always recommend that even if you type, you actually handwrite
a little something
with your handwriting. Yeah.
Okay, and then just one final question, just for people who are thinking, you know, I talk to people all the time, I'm texting, why would I write them a forever letter? Why is just writing, the act of writing, so important?
We text as you began. We text, we tweet, we do all of these other things.
We over-communicate.
We over-communicate, but a letter you have forever, and you can actually look back to it when you're feeling yucky. And you can say, hey, how does this motivate me? I was talking to a teacher the other day who received a letter from a student that is in her forever letter pile for when she feels defeated. She can then pull out this letter. And, you know, there are teachers that have not such good days. And so she has this letter from this student from several years ago who she helped in this amazing way. She gave the student her shoes to wear on a performance day because the student had just come from the hospital, her mother had cancer, and now the student wrote to her and thanked her for this gift of being able to succeed on this day, and also of helping her and speaking to some counselors and teachers later to help move her forward. And it has to this very day.
What a great thing, and what a great way to kind of think about this. What gift do you want to give that somebody could revisit down the road? Thank you so much. Your book is wonderful. I learned a lot. I'm going to write my letter. Elana is one of the featured speakers at the, and I've written a few already. She's one of the featured speakers at the Search for Meaning Festival, Saturday, February 24th, which is my birthday.
Oh, happy
Seattle
birthday.
University. So we've linked more on our website about that. When we come back, how one Seattle teenager is taking traffic safety solutions into his own hands. It's pretty incredible.